Some of the places you go, that's the part that if you don't like that, and if you don't like just, I mean, from when it finally ended for me, I've never been camping since then. I could care less if I ever go in the woods, if I ever sleep under a tree. Bugs, mosquitoes, and you don't think about it when you're there. It's just part of what's going on. And you do get to know. I mean, you're on a hot truck crew. The intensity of that compared to most of what we did, they're two different worlds. I get so absolutely livid and angry when the Storm King stuff happens, when what just happened in Arizona happens. Because I strongly believe it never ever should it happen. And most of it has to do, and I really believe this, with unqualified people not wanting to be in charge and they don't want to bear the risk. And you get into the initial attack situation, the intensity of the fire burning. Some people want to do something, they're heroes, but there are many of those people that grew up in the bureaucratic environment that are pulled out of an office and are stuck out there, and their fire experience is classes. They don't know. We in Alaska, we had probably the best model that you could have anywhere. Because one thing we did, and we were weaned on and you grew up on and you knew, was initial attack. And the advantage we had was to be up there at 1,000, 2,000 feet when you're flying to it, and then you'd circle and you'd tell the pilot to stay in the air till as long as you want to, till you figure out where everything is, where you're going to land, where your escape routes are, why you are not going to go here or there, if even you're going to go do anything. Sometimes you just look at it and just say, we don't belong here. All we're going to do is run. So, and nobody's going to stop it. But what we did in Alaska, and it became the norm, even with, at that time, overhead crews. We didn't have type 1s and 2s and 3s and that kind of thing, but they had the overhead crews. The last thing they wanted was to be there. You haul in a crew out of that met their buddies in Las Vegas in February, and they worked together for the better part of a week in a hotel in Vegas, and then say you're class this or that, you're qualified to be a line boss, and you're qualified to be a fire boss, and you're a GS 14, so you're going to be the obvious, you're going to be the obvious fire boss or incident guy. In Alaska, whoever was the fire boss on the initial attack is the fire boss until it's contained, and we never used the word contained back then. It was either out or under control or what. That's become such a ridiculous term and a ridiculous name too. But they would bring these overheads in, and the teams and all. They had a hard time with it. Some of them did, and some of them welcomed it. But I could be out there for 6 weeks at a time, in charge of 10 different project fires from 5,000 acres to 50,000 acres to 100,000 acres. But they have 25 helicopters, and it's me, and I'm a GS7. The people that were really good, which were, the majority of them knew that they didn't belong there, didn't want to be there, didn't know how our system works, didn't know what was available or what to do, and they welcomed it. but the ones that just wanted to screw with you. But the BLM people, all the way to the state director, stood behind us. So whenever you did something, if you had a reason for it, I had a guy, a helicopter pilot, who they'd hired this helicopter from some God knows where, but I mean, I know where, but how they did this. He had an FH 1100 Heller helicopter, and he had been a pilot in Vietnam. And he was flying the Pan Am building thing in New York, from downtown, the hotel or wherever it was, to out to Idlewild or JFK or out there. That was it. But I had the military experience, but he flew that helicopter by himself and nobody else with him all the way up to Fairbanks. So we got to Fairbanks, and it's 24-hour daylight. They sent him up to Fort Yukon, about 200 miles north of Fairbanks then, right on the Yukon River. And I was running an operation out of there with about 7 or 8 fires. And we had overhead teams on each one. And my job is really just to coordinate for them and then give them what they want. But to tell them this is what they will do and this is what they will get. And here's what's available, and not try to make them comfortable and answer their questions. But literally, you're still in charge of them. And I sent this helicopter out to this crew that's not 20 miles away for the first one. About an hour later, maybe 2, he comes flying back into Fort Yukon, and the guy's crying. And he says, God, he says, I'm dead. He says, I fly all the way across the country, all the way to Alaska, and I get fired in the first hour. And he says, I'm going to be fired from my job because the helicopter, they're going to have to send a pilot up here to take over this helicopter. I says, no, hold on, slow him to explain it to me. So the guy tells me that the fire boss put his other 2 guys on board, and they want to go up and look at their fire. But it isn't that they want to look at their fire, they're ordering the pilot how to fly. And he said that they were making him hover and stop between 50 and 100 feet. And then just sit there and hover, and they'd say this, and they'd say, go over to that spot, do the same thing. He says, I did it a couple of times, and then I kind of had to pull up, and I had to turn around, and I had to tell him how unsafe this was. He said, well, it's a helicopter, it can hover. He says, no, you don't understand, we're out of ground effect. He says, if that thing quits on us at 50 to 100 feet, we drop like a rock. He says, I need 1,000 feet, or I need forward speed, but I can't give up one or the other. I've got to have one of them. And he says, I can be at 50 feet at 100 miles an hour, and I can rotate. But he says, well, when I'm maybe 20 to 30 feet off the ground, and I'm out of that cushion, he says, I'm dead. So, he says, fine, you're not fired, you don't have a problem. Go up to this other fire and see if that works out any better for you. And these guys get on the radio and says, where's that goddamn helicopter pilot? I said, that chicken shit, he won't do anything I say. He says, well, you don't have a helicopter, you had one. We don't have another helicopter for you, you're not going to get one. And I think my radio is going out. And honestly, God didn't talk to him for 2 days. And then went out and very nicely explained to him. And this is a GS-15. And then, I think that's as high as they go. But they stood behind you. So they let us stay in charge. And for my belief is that, at least in my 7 years in Alaska, I don't think the BLM ever stopped an out-of-control fire that had been burning out of control for longer than somewhere around 24 hours. You could have 100,000 people, and they won't stop until it rains or they run into water. Doesn't happen. They're really good at getting there. But they also allowed us, when we weren't out jumping, we would ride in the lead planes to tell the pilots where they should make the lines. They also created a position called Super Fire Boss, which was 4 of us that had been there the longest. And they would always have one, and you were in charge of the helitack within 150 miles. And you were the coordinator. You went out there and you told the retardant where to drop. You would tell Fairbanks Dispatch how many men they needed, and all the other, whatever else they needed, chainsaws, those kinds of things. But you'd order the supplies for them while they were working on the fire. And you ran that whole thing for hours. You'd have to come back and get the nearest fuel and go back and do it again. And at times you'd even act as the lead plane for the retardant drops. So they would let us do that. What killed it is when the Forest Service adopted hazard pay. And when these guys were getting time and a half now, because Forest Service back then only got straight time. The idiocies of the system, meaning we have BLM and we have Forest Service, Department of Interior and Department of Agriculture, firefighters. When I left Grangeville, and I didn't leave there to go get more money, I left there because they took the Ford Trimotor away. And that was my thrill and joy, was having a Ford Trimotor to fly around in. I went to Fairbanks, and I went from $282 an hour straight time, working for the Forest Service, as a GS6 jumper, to $685 an hour, not including the $685, but plus time and a half, plus 25% cost of living allowance. So I was getting on overtime. We were doing what was called, we would max out in a pay period, in a 2-week pay period, because there was fire somewhere always in Alaska. It can be wet and rainy there. It's like the whole U.S. or whatever the size of it. But, and they'd never get away with this today. We were not allowed as seasonal employees to earn more money in a pay period than the state director. And because it's 24 hours of daylight, you can work 48 hours for a while. Then they wised up in D.C. and decided that no, you can't work 48 hours because it's not safe. Well, we are working 48 hours because the radio's coming at us, and they went through 3 dispatchers, but they all want to know what's going on and what they're doing and who's doing this and that and supplies, and they all want to talk to me because that's my name is on the thing. But it's also anybody else that's there. You can work 24 hours. And there isn't any difference at midnight from 6 in the morning. And so it would take about 120 hours of overtime. And that meant you had made it from the first day of the pay period, Sunday, to a week after the next Wednesday, so 10 days. You have 120 hours overtime. Then you were free. You had to work for free. Some guys figured out how to beat that because then they would disappear and take sick leave. So they had it, but they never got invited back. They weren't rehired once they had a record of doing that. But that's the honest to God truth. They wouldn't. Yeah, they made you. If you wanted to keep your job, you had to work for free. But we didn't care because it was called you're maxing out, and you did that for 6 or 7 pay periods in a row, and you went home. And you'd walk away with 5 times what you'd walk away with in the summer down here. And that's the government. And so these guys down here in Missoula, they tried to organize a union. So I came down here, we got rained out, the big flood hit Fairbanks in my first year in '67 in the middle of August. And it was burning like crazy down here. So we came down here. I was thinking I'm going to really be smart and get out of town, come back home. I could go to work for the Forest Service. And that was it. It was $2.82 an hour. By the time we got here, we took an extra day in Seattle. There was two of us, both from Missoula. The BLM crew that I was with was already here because they had called up and ordered them to come down. So I'm working with the same people that I was, and I'm at $2.82 an hour, and these guys are doing the same thing. So same job, same government, same everything, but they were not rehiring guys that were trying to organize a union here, because they said it's blatantly unfair to be side by each with somebody else that's doing the same job. You're totally interchangeable. You use people from both sides. You don't do anything any differently.